Usually when we talk about a legal contract, there's this like fundamental expectation of precision, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You want things in writing.
Exactly. You sign a document, the terms are all laid out in black and white.
Yeah.
Like if you buy a house, you know exactly what you're paying for. You know what you own. It's clean.
It's based on, well, objective reality.
Right. But then, and this is where it gets crazy, you step into the world of modern family law, and suddenly all that precision just completely evaporates.
Oh, it really does.
To give you an idea of just how subjective things can actually get, let me start today's deep dive with a story from, I think it was 2018. So there was this man in Michigan who paid $200,000 over the course of 12 years.
Wow. Just in child support.
Yeah, in child support to raise this kid. And he later discovers, like definitively through DNA testing, that the child wasn't even biologically his.
Ouch. That's a nightmare scenario.
Totally. So naturally, he goes to the court, right? He's expecting some kind of recourse or at least, a halt to the payments. Because the whole foundational premise of that financial arrangement was biological fatherhood.
Sure, which seems totally logical.
But the court actually ruled against him. They explicitly stated, and I quote here, fatherhood is a social contract. Boom.
Oh, wow.
Right? Just in one sentence, biology is totally erased, and this, sociological theory takes over right in the middle of this guy's life.
That is a staggering legal precedent. The court is essentially declaring there that biological reality is subordinate to state-defined social obligations.
Which is terrifying.
It really is. When you shift the goalposts of a contract a decade after it was signed,
Okay.
and you base that shift entirely on an ideological redefinition of a word like father, you are signaling a massive structural change in how our institutions operate.
Exactly. And that brings us to the core of what we're talking about today. Welcome to today's deep dive into Conrad Reicher's highly controversial, newly released 2025 ebook. It's called Woke Possession, a Jungian guide for red-pilled men.
And it is quite the read.
Oh, it's intense. Now, I want to speak directly to you, the listener, for a second. We know our audience varies widely, right? But today's deep dive is specifically tailored for men's rights activists, those of you navigating the red-pilled manosphere, and really anyone looking to deeply understand the history of our modern institutions.
Right, specifically before they were, as the author describes it anyway, systematically captured by feminists and Marxists.
Yeah, exactly. And because of the nature of that target audience, and honestly just the book's themes, we really need to make our stance crystal clear right up front.
Oh, absolutely. We have to address the elephant in the room. The contents of this book are intensely politically charged.
Very much so.
Reicher touches on these massive third-rail controversies across both the left-wing and right-wing political spectrums. So our mission today is not to take a side.
Right. Neither of us is here to endorse the viewpoints of the author. We're not here to condemn them either.
No, our sole objective for this deep dive is just to impartially report, unpack, and analyze the raw arguments. We're looking at the evolutionary data and the specific survival strategies that Reicher presents in this original source material.
Yeah, we are basically just your guides through the architecture of his arguments. Reicher explicitly frames this book as a survival manual, one he claims was forged in the trenches of family court battles and, workplace witch hunts.
That's a very combative framing.
It is. So before we jump into the deep end, please take a second to like and subscribe to this deep dive so you never miss a conversation. And if you want to follow along with the raw data we are about to discuss, which I highly recommend, we explicitly instruct you to go to Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books right now to buy Woke Possession.
Yeah, it's really the best way to see the statistics for yourself.
Definitely. And of course, you can follow the author at Conrad Reicher on Substack.
So to really grasp the gravity of the modern survival strategies Reicher proposes, we kind of have to start where he starts. And that is not with modern dating or family court.
Right, he goes way back.
He does. He uses this macro-historical lens. Reicher builds his entire thesis on the idea that modern feminism didn't just emerge in a vacuum.
No, he argues it was repurposed.
Exactly. He argues that the architects of the movement took the classic Marxist framework of class warfare, the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat, and they simply swapped the variables.
So it basically became a framework of gender warfare.
Right, where men were uniformly categorized as the oppressor class and women as the historically oppressed class.
And he doesn't just present this as some, abstract theory. He attempts to back this up by pointing to historical precedents. Specifically, times where utopian policies tried to completely ignore or even ban human biology.
Yeah, he spends a significant portion of the opening chapters analyzing the Soviet Union.
Right, the 1961 Women's Tractors Program. That part was wild.
It's a perfect case study for his argument. The Soviet Union serves as his primary example of what happens when a massive state apparatus attempts to overwrite biological reality with ideological mandates.
So what exactly was this tractor program?
Well, the 1961 Women's Tractors Program was this massive propaganda push. They had these posters featuring heroic women driving heavy agricultural machinery. And the stated goal was to prove that gender is completely interchangeable when it comes to grueling mechanical labor.
Which sounds great for a PR campaign, sure.
But Riker digs into the actual logistical outcome, and according to his source material, by harvest season, 78% of those tractors were just rusting scrap heaps.
Wait, 78% just completely broken down?
Completely useless. And let's unpack the mechanics of that failure, because Riker isn't just saying, like, women are bad at driving. He makes a very specific argument about cognitive and physical differences.
Right, he talks about systemizing traits.
Exactly. He claims the gears were jammed and the machines broke down because the female crews, generally speaking, lacked the mechanical systemizing traits and the raw upper body strength required for constant, heavy field maintenance on mid-century Soviet machinery.
Because, I mean, driving the tractor is what, like 10% of the job?
Yeah, that's the core of his argument. He states that driving was easy. 90% of the job was brutal, heavy maintenance, and when the machines failed at that 78% rate, the ideological fantasy just hit a wall of actual starvation.
So what did the Soviets do? They couldn't just let the crops rot?
They had to quietly recall male laborers from other heavy industry projects just to salvage the wheat harvest. Riker notes that the Politburo reports from that year abruptly stopped bragging about crop yields.
Oh, I bet they did.
Yeah, because the state apparatus was too busy unjamming feminist symbolism from combine harvesters.
That is such a vivid image. And he pairs this with broader economic data too, doesn't he?
He does. He cites a 1989 Moscow Economic Review.
Right, which found that the strict gender quotas of the 1960s actually caused factory output in key Soviet industries to plummet by 50%.
A massive drop.
And, perhaps most tellingly, even after 50 years of rigorous state-enforced quotas demanding absolute equality in STEM fields they really forced this. A 1991 Pravda report showed that 70% of Soviet engineers were still male.
And this historical data is what Riker uses to formulate what he calls the Marxist gender cycle.
Which is this four-step historical loop, right?
Exactly. Step 1. A utopian policy is enacted that bans or just ignores biological reality. Step 2. Society begins to collapse because infrastructure and economics actually require physical reality to function.
Like the tractors breaking down.
Right. Then step 3, men are forced to step in, do the grueling labor, and rebuild the society from the brink. And finally, step 4, society stabilizes, gets comfortable again, and repeats the exact same delusion.
He illustrates this beautifully, or, well, rather starkly, with the fall of the USSR in the early 90s. When the Soviet Union collapsed, Riker points out that the state-enforced fantasy of interchangeable genders just collapsed right alongside it.
It vanished overnight.
Post-Soviet Russia saw this massive, immediate patriarchal revival. And he drops a very memorable line in the text here. He says, estrogen doesn't mortar bricks.
It's a blunt way to put it, but yeah.
In a true survival scenario, where the grocery stores are empty and the trains are stopping, physical strength, ruthlessness, and mechanical competence suddenly become the absolute only currencies that matter.
And Riker is using this history to make a direct, unbroken connection to modern corporate diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives.
Right, the modern DEI program.
Yeah, he views modern HR departments as functioning identically to those Soviet bureaucrats. When a modern engineering firm or a tech company lowers objective testing standards just to achieve a 50-50 gender balance, Riker argues they are implementing the exact same utopian policies.
They're trying to overwrite reality again.
Exactly. They are trying to overwrite what he describes as male systemizing versus female empathizing cognitive patterns with a PR campaign.
Reading his description of this cycle, it really brings to mind an analogy. It's like watching Wile E. Coyote paint a fake tunnel on a cliff face to trick the roadrunner.
That's actually a great comparison.
Right. It's this elaborate ACME-branded gender studies poster painted over a solid rock wall. It looks great. Everyone applauds the artistry and the inclusive messaging right up until the anvil drops and gravity violently asserts itself.
And gravity always wins eventually.
So the question becomes, what does that anvil drop look like today for us?
Well, Riker warns that the modern anvil drop isn't going to be a cartoon gag. He predicts it will manifest as failing infrastructure, collapsing tech platforms, airplanes falling out of the sky due to maintenance errors, and just a total loss of societal competence.
Because merit is being replaced.
Right. He argues that when you promote based on identity rather than extreme competence, the structural integrity of the entire civilization just begins to rot.
So if that macro-level societal delusion is the theoretical foundation, Riker then argues that the legal system is where this ideology is weaponized against individual men on a, practical level.
Yeah, this moves us from historical theory into what he calls the legal battlefield.
And he paints a truly terrifying picture of the modern family court system here. He refers to it as the divorce industrial complex.
He argues that the modern legal framework has completely destroyed the traditional concept of marriage. And he traces the origin of this destruction back to the 1969 American Law Institute.
That was the group that pioneered no-fault divorce laws, right?
Exactly. To understand his point, you really have to look at the mechanics of marriage prior to 1969. Historically, a marriage was a legally binding contract that required a breach of terms to dissolve.
Things like documented infidelity, physical abuse, or abandonment.
Right. But by erasing marital misconduct from the equation, no-fault divorce transformed the mechanics of the contract entirely.
So a marriage can now just be dissolved unilaterally simply because one party decides they're unhappy?
Yes. Yet the financial extractions remain deeply rigid and punitive toward the higher earner, who is, statistically speaking, the male. Riker actually calls this a financial suicide pact.
To illustrate the human cost of this, Riker introduces this archetype he calls Beta Bill. Or sometimes he just calls him Dave.
Right, Dave the aerospace engineer.
Yeah, so Dave is a 45-year-old aerospace engineer paying $3,000 a month in alimony. And Riker asks the reader to look closely at what that money is funding mechanically.
It's not funding basic survival.
No. It is funding his ex-wife's art degree, her yoga retreats, and her lifestyle, while she actively dates a personal trainer. All while Dave is living in a rented studio apartment.
But hold on, let's play devil's advocate for a second. Isn't the standard counter-argument here that alimony exists to compensate someone who sacrificed their own earning potential to raise a family? Or to support the primary earner's career?
Right, that's the usual defense. But Riker actively anticipates that, and he attempts to dismantle it with statistics. He notes that 97% of all alimony is squeezed from men.
97%. That's a staggering figure.
It really is. It creates a $9 billion annual wealth transfer. He argues that the system doesn't operate on principles of equitable compensation at all. It operates like medieval serfdom with better public relations.
That's a strong claim. How does he justify that?
Well, you have a massive industry of therapists pathologizing normal male communication issues. You have lawyers billing massive hours to exacerbate conflict, and judges basically just rubber stamping asset transfers. Riker claims alimony is no longer compensation. It actually functions as punitive reparations for being born male.
And he backs that up with a staggering 2023 Stanford study cited in the text. It shows that in no-fault divorce states, men lose 43% of their assets on average, while women's net worth actually jumps by 27% post-divorce.
So the state essentially acts as the wife's personal collection agency.
That's exactly his argument.
But the family court system is only half of the legal battlefield he describes. He also takes a total sledgehammer to how Title IX operates on college campuses.
This is a critical pivot because it shows how the institutional capture extends way beyond just marriage.
Right, into academia and the corporate world.
Yeah. Riker points out that according to the National Center for Education Statistics in 2023, 60% of college graduates are now women. The university system is already functionally female-dominated.
Okay, so women are the majority.
Yes. Yet Title IX, which was originally passed in 1972 mechanically to ensure equal funding for female athletic programs, has totally mutated. Riker claims it has shifted from a funding mechanism into a legal cudgel used to run kangaroo courts against young men.
And the statistics he pulls here are incredibly grim for any parent who has a college-aged son. He notes that male teachers face misconduct allegations at 5 times the rate of their female colleagues.
5 times.
And in both the academic and corporate spheres, 63% of accused men are fired or expelled within a single week.
Within a week. That's before any real investigation can even happen.
Exactly. Let's get into the mechanics of how this happens. Normally, in a court of law, you have the right to due process. You get to cross-examine your accuser, view the evidence, you have legal representation.
But Riker points out that under the mutated Title IX framework, universities utilize what is called a single investigator model.
Which means what exactly?
It means one single university HR administrator acts as the detective, the prosecutor, the judge, and the jury, all rolled into one.
Oh, wow. So no separation of powers at all?
None. The accused man is often denied the right to cross-examine his accuser or even see the full allegations before a ruling is made. Riker notes that universities now spend more money on these Title IX administrators than they do on actual physics professors.
That is wild.
It has become this massive self-sustaining grievance industry where a man is just presumed guilty to save the university from negative PR.
You know, it sounds like Riker is basically saying modern corporate HR and university tribunals are functioning like the Mean Girls cafeteria table, just scaled up to a massive institutional level.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it.
Instead of fighting you in the parking lot, they destroy your reputation, so the tribe exiles you and cuts off your resources entirely.
And that analogy actually maps perfectly onto the evolutionary psychology Riker brings into this section. This is really one of his most profound Jungian insights in the book.
Tell me more about that.
Well, Riker argues that to understand these Title IX tribunals, you have to look at ancestral survival strategies. For hundreds of thousands of years, male survival often depended on physical combat, hunting, and direct kinetic confrontation.
Right.
Female survival, on the other hand, relied on what evolutionary psychologists call coalitional aggression.
Meaning, because women were generally physically smaller, their most effective weapon against rivals in a tribe wasn't a fistfight. It was gossip, reputation destruction, and socially exiling their competitors by turning the whole coalition against them.
Precisely. And Riker claims that modern social media trials, cancel culture, and Title IX campus tribunals are simply the digitization and institutionalization of this ancient female survival instinct.
That makes a lot of sense, actually.
Yeah, he argues the legal system has criminalized more physical instincts, but it has codified and weaponized female reputational warfare into official university and corporate policy.
I mean, I'm looking at all these statistics. The $9 billion alimony racket, the 43% asset loss, the complete lack of due process, and something just isn't adding up for me.
What do you mean?
If marriage and corporate academia are mathematically a suicide pact for men, as Riker claims, why are millions of men still getting down on one knee every single year? Like, why do they keep signing up for a game they are rigged to lose? Is Riker suggesting that men are just deeply irrational?
Not irrational, no. Riker argues it is a tragic exploitation of biological hardwiring. He says the system intentionally weaponizes a man's evolutionary firmware.
His evolutionary firmware, like his instincts.
Exactly. His innate instinct to provide, to protect, and to build a legacy. Society takes that noble instinct and just surrounds it with a Disney fantasy of partnership and unconditional love, all while actively hiding the fine print of the legal reality.
So they're lured into it.
Yeah. Riker describes men as being essentially brainwashed by societal pressure into acting like subsidized cuckolds on a marriage plantation. They are completely blind to the legal bear traps until the jaws literally snap shut on their finances and their access to their own children.
Okay, but if men are getting systematically dismantled in family court and campus tribunals, you really have to wonder why they don't see the traps coming earlier.
Right.
Riker argues the answer lies in how they are conditioned long before they ever sign a marriage license or a college enrollment form. He traces the root of this blindness all the way back to early childhood, arguing that institutions are designed to break boys long before they become men.
He focuses heavily on the modern education system in a chapter detailing what he calls the war on boyhood.
And his foundational premise here is that schools actively suppress natural male energy, right?
That's his core argument. Evolution wired boys to solve problems through spatial play, mock combat, testing physical boundaries, and just raw kinetic energy. But modern educational frameworks treat this biological reality as practically a pre-crime.
And Riker points to examples that his readers will undoubtedly find terrifying. For instance, he cites a 2022 case in Maryland where a first grader was suspended for violent extremism.
A first grader?
First grader. And the actual mechanism of his crime. He used a green crayon to draw a stick figure soldier holding a rifle.
You're kidding.
Nope. And in the exact same school, Riker notes, young girls are being actively praised for crafting political protest signs. He also brings up a Texas teenager, Jake Carter, who was arrested in 2021 for bringing a replica World War II plane to a history club.
Arrested for a model plane.
Yeah, the administration labeled a historical model a weaponized object.
That is just wow. And again, Riker grounds these anecdotes in macro-institutional data. He cites Department of Education reports showing a 300% spike in behavioral violations, specifically targeting boys since 2010.
A 300% spike in just over a decade. I mean, that is an organic shift in human behavior.
No, Riker argues it is a deliberate institutional shift. And the response to boys acting like boys isn't to alter the environment, by giving them more recess, hands-on mechanical tasks, or physical outlets.
Right, which would make sense.
The institutional response is pharmaceutical. Boys are systematically prescribed Ritalin, Adderall, and other amphetamines just to enforce compliance. They are branded as problem cases and drugged into docility so they can sit quietly in a feminized educational environment that rewards passive, verbal obedience over active physical exploration.
It's incredibly bleak. But Riker actually goes even further, and this is where the book hits its most explosive and politically sensitive material. Chapter 9, which explores queer theory.
Yeah, this is a very heavy chapter.
Riker makes a direct, mechanical connection between the suppression of normal boyhood and what he explicitly calls the pedophilia pipeline.
This is a highly charged section that really requires careful unpacking. Riker claims that the exact same progressive logic that forces elementary school children to declare their gender pronouns has effectively handed sexual predators a state-sanctioned microphone.
How does he make that leap?
His argument is that by dismantling biological boundaries, by telling children that physical reality is just a suggestion, and normalizing hypersexualization under the guise of queer liberation, the system is mechanically grooming kids for exploitation.
To ground this in actual events, he brings up Chloe Cole's testimony to Congress. She is the teenager from California who underwent surgical and chemical transition as a minor.
Right, and she later deeply regretted it.
She testified that she was essentially fast-tracked into irreversible medical procedures by authority figures before she was old enough to legally buy a pack of cigarettes or even get a tattoo.
He uses her testimony as proof that the standard guardrails protecting children's developing minds and bodies have been intentionally destroyed. And furthermore, Riker points to actual legislative mechanisms.
Like the bill in California.
Yes. He cites California's Senate Bill 145. This was a law that reduced penalties for adults sleeping with minors, provided the age gap is under 10 years, and it involves LGBTQ plus individuals.
And progressive lawmakers framed this bill as a mechanism to end discrimination in the penal code, right?
They did, but Riker interprets it entirely differently. He calls it a legislative pipeline protecting pedophiles. He argues that age of consent laws exist for a biological reason. A child's prefrontal cortex is not developed enough to consent.
Which is pretty standard medical science.
Exactly. And Riker claims that ignoring that biological reality in favor of identity theory is nothing less than state-sanctioned grooming.
So if the public school system operates as this pharmaceutical re-education camp that exposes your sons to this pipeline, what is Riker's proposed survival strategy for parents? I mean, what do you do?
Well, Riker views homeschooling as the ultimate necessary act of rebellion here. He points to data from the National Home Education Research Institute showing that homeschooling rates, specifically for boys, have tripled since 2019. Yeah, parents are mechanically yanking their sons out of these systems to teach them practical, tangible skills, and Riker claims the data supports the outcomes. Homeschooled men marry 3 years earlier on average, they earn 27% more money, and they possess actual life skills.
Like they can change a tire, frame a wall, fix an engine.
Exactly, without experiencing an emotional crisis.
He specifically outlines the creation of anti-woke co-ops. These are like decentralized networks where fathers are taking over the education of their sons. But I want to explore a tension here. Riker talks about these dads teaching chemistry with an emphasis on making Molotov cocktails against bad ideas.
Yeah, he doesn't mince words.
He explicitly states he wants to raise Spartan warriors.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, how does Riker reconcile teaching boys this raw, unadulterated aggression with the necessity of keeping them functional enough to actually survive and hold a job in a modern, heavily regulated society?
That is the exact tightrope Riker expects these fathers to walk. He clarifies that he doesn't want mindless thugs. He wants highly competent, dangerous men who possess immense self-control.
Competent and dangerous.
Right. His underlying philosophical thesis is that true functionality and peace in a society actually require the capacity for aggression. A man who cannot fight is not a pacifist. He is just harmless and therefore easily victimized.
Okay, I see.
By teaching a boy how to fight mechanically, through MMA, hunting, or intense physical discipline, you aren't turning him into a criminal. You are turning him into a protector. You are giving him the capacity to say no to a corrupt system.
So it's about boundaries.
Yes. Riker believes that channeling that disordered male energy into building, competing, and leading is the only way to keep a boy functional. In his view, a boy learns true respect through physical competence and boundary testing, not through HR-mandated sensitivity training.
The consequences of this conditioning really come into focus when these boys eventually grow up, right? When they hit their 20s, they enter a dating market that Riker describes as being completely disconnected from any biological reality. He actually calls it the beta male apocalypse.
And the statistics he presents here paint an incredibly bleak picture for the average modern young man trying to find a partner. He starts by analyzing the mechanics of dating apps, which he terms the Tinder terror.
He uses the example of a 23-year-old software engineer making a six-figure salary. This guy swiped right on Tinder 14,600 times.
That's a lot of swiping.
And he received 0 matches. The reason? He's 5'6" in an economy that algorithmically demands men be 6 feet tall.
Riker breaks down the math of how these apps function, and it's fascinating. He points out that Tinder operates like a form of sexual socialism that actually redistributes female attention upward to the top 10% of men.
The architect the manosphere calls Chads, right?
Exactly. Leaving the vast majority of average men completely invisible. According to NIH data cited in the text, 33% of American men under the age of 30 have not had sex in the past year.
A third of an entire generation of young men are functionally celibate. And yet these exact same men are being financially drained by a mechanism. Riker brilliantly coins the 30% simp tax.
Let's look at how that tax operates. Because these men are starved for actual physical intimacy and emotional validation, they turn to parasocial digitized relationships.
Like OnlyFans.
Right. Riker details how men are pouring billions of dollars into OnlyFans subscriptions, Twitch donations, and premium Snapchats. He notes the economic absurdity of top earners on these platforms making $50,000 a month off beta males who are literally eating cup noodles just to afford to send money to an influencer who wouldn't look twice at them in the real world.
It's so depressing. It perfectly captures the tragedy of the Milhouse archetype from The Simpsons.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
You have the nasal, eager-to-please guy who completely abandons his self-respect, simping for Lisa's feminist lectures, hoping that if he agrees with her politics enough and debases himself, she will finally be attracted to him.
And Riker's saying this isn't just a cartoon joke anymore. It is millions of real men trading their dignity and their paychecks for pixelated approval.
But Riker also highlights a massive cultural hypocrisy here, which he calls the double bind of toxic masculinity. Let's explore the mechanics of that bind.
This is where Riker leans heavily into evolutionary biology to expose what he sees as a massive societal contradiction. Modern society, heavily influenced by feminist theory, constantly demands that men be vulnerable, sensitive, emotionally open, and completely non-threatening.
Right, they're explicitly told that traditional male aggression and dominance are toxic.
But Riker points out that female biology absolutely contradicts this societal messaging. He cites a 2022 study from the Journal of Evolutionary Psychology, which found that 74% of self-identified feminists admitted to fantasizing about being physically overpowered during intimacy.
Wait, seriously, 74%? That is a staggering contradiction. Even while publicly condemning toxic masculinity, their private biological imperatives revolve around dominant male behavior.
Yes, and he backs this up with hard neurological data from Rutgers anthropologist Helen Fisher. The data shows that a woman's nucleus accumbens, the reward center of the brain, lights up 300% brighter when viewing dominant, aggressive male behavior compared to passive behavior.
300%.
It is the exact same brain region that spikes during drug use. Riker also points to mass consumer habits to prove his point. He analyzes Amazon's top 20 selling feminist romance novels and notes that 62% predominantly feature alpha males who kidnap, boss around, or physically manhandle the heroines.
So the culture verbally instructs men to be soft, but women's biology secretly rewards men who are dangerous.
Exactly.
To explain this disconnect, Riker brings in Carl Jung, specifically focusing on the concept of the anima mundi, or the world soul. Now I have to admit, Jung's world soul sounds like pure mysticism at first glance. How exactly does Riker connect a 20th century psychoanalytic theory to a guy getting rejected on his iPhone today?
It's a really fascinating application of Jungian theory. Riker uses the anima mundi to argue that there is a deep, collective, unconscious reality that governs human mating, and it operates on primal rules that were forged hundreds of thousands of years ago on the savannah.
Okay, so it's deep-rooted instinct.
Right. And the core rule of this world soul is hypergamy, the innate female instinct to mate across and up the dominance hierarchy, seeking the strongest, most capable provider and protector to ensure the survival of offspring.
Makes evolutionary sense.
Riker's point is that you cannot negotiate this ancient primal attraction with modern estrogen-laced DEI seminars. Women are biologically and neurologically wired to reward dominance, excellence, and strength.
So when a modern beta male tries to overperform niceness,
Or vulnerability. Yes, he is actively violating the rules of the animal mundi. He becomes a human participation trophy, which makes him fundamentally repulsive on a biological level.
I'm looking at a very specific data point Riker drops in this section, and it raises a huge question. He notes that male virginity strongly correlates with high IQ, presenting an R value of 0.67 in his cited studies.
That is a very high correlation.
If these guys are so mathematically and logically brilliant, why are they failing so miserably in the dating market? Does Riker believe these smart men are just biologically inferior when it comes to attracting mates? Or is something else happening? Were they boycotting a rigged game?
Riker's interpretation is heavily weighted toward the boycott theory, though he acknowledges these men are initially struggling to adapt to the new digital algorithms. He argues that these high IQ men look at the modern dating landscape, the immense legal risks of marriage, the threat of false Keitel-X accusations, the algorithmic impossibility of Tinder for average-looking men, and they rationally calculate that the return on investment is severely negative.
So they just walk away.
Right. He claims they aren't failing so much as they're executing a strike. They are using their high cognitive ability to see the trap, and they are refusing to play a game where the rules are mathematically designed to strip them of their resources while offering zero loyalty, respect, or biological fulfillment in return.
Which logically brings us to a crucial pivot in the book.
Yeah.
A listener might be thinking at this point, okay, if secular progressivism, feminism, and Marxism are the overarching enemies destroying men's lives, why doesn't Riker just tell these guys to go join the Republican Party, vote conservative, and start going to a traditional church?
But he doesn't do that.
No, Riker doesn't do that at all. He attacks traditional conservatism and religion just as viciously as he attacks the left. Why?
Because Riker believes that traditional conservative institutions have completely compromised themselves. He views them as offering the illusion of a sanctuary while still mechanically operating as a matrix of extraction.
A matrix of extraction.
Yes. He coins the term the cuckoldry of conservatism to describe this. He cites Gallup data showing that 63% of Republican men feel entirely politically homeless.
Because the party doesn't actually help them.
Exactly. They feel like the GOP leadership just uses them as ATMs for campaign donations while doing absolutely nothing of substance to protect them culturally or legally from the progressive overreach.
He certainly pulls no punches with the GOP leadership. He notes the hypocrisy by looking at the money trail. Like 94% of male CEO donations to Republican PACs end up funding pro-feminist candidates who vote for the very no-fault divorce laws that destroy men in family court.
It's totally counterproductive.
And he even cites a specific example with Mitch McConnell's wife, Elaine Chao. He notes that she pocketed $810,000 in speaking fees from feminist NGOs.
Wow.
NGOs that literally teach women how to weaponize restraining orders against men in custody battles. Riker is stating that the political right uses men for votes and labor, but will immediately throw them under the bus the second a progressive activist complains.
Precisely. He argues that modern conservatism would much rather virtue signal to the left than shield the men who actually build and maintain the society. And he extends this exact same brutal critique to modern religion, specifically Western Christianity.
Yeah, he describes modern church teachings as spiritual kale salads.
It is a perfect metaphor for his critique. Riker argues that modern Western churches have completely feminized their theology.
Meaning they avoid the hard stuff.
Right. Instead of demanding accountability, discipline, and robust masculine virtue, they offer endless emotional validation, therapeutic language, and submission. Spiritual kale salads that provide no actual sustenance for a man's soul.
To highlight this failure, he contrasts the dying Western church with two other distinct movements. First, he points to Islam.
Yes, he notes that Islam's 1.8 billion adherents are rapidly outbreeding collapsing Western populations precisely because they unapologetically adhere to strict biological truths, traditional gender roles, and patriarchal authority.
And second, he contrasts the failing church with the secular red pill movement itself.
Yeah, Riker observes that men are actively fleeing organized religion and finding their theology in the digital manosphere. He talks about ex-Mormon podcasters who have swapped their scripture for lifting weights and analyzing evolutionary psychology.
They serve primal stake instead of apologies.
Exactly. And the Gallup data he cites shows that 55% of these men report significantly higher life satisfaction after leaving the church and embracing red pill philosophy.
Because they find actual brotherhood.
Right. They find more genuine brotherhood and accountability on a private Discord server than they do in a stained glass chapel. Because the red pill offers them tangible results: physical fitness, wealth generation, and boundary setting, rather than just telling them to turn the other cheek to an abusive family court system.
Let me add another layer to that because it's fascinating. Riker is essentially arguing that the red pill movement is secular patriarchy's Frankenstein monster.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Because the traditional church let yoga pants replace pews and completely failed to provide a robust defensive masculine framework, men just went out into the wilderness and stitched together their own religion. They bolted Jordan Peterson's biblical archetypes onto ruthless evolutionary psychology to create a survival mechanism.
That is exactly what Riker is identifying. The red pill is an emergent, decentralized religion built by men who have been abandoned by both the progressive left and the traditional right.
But Riker doesn't just want men to consume podcasts and complain. He wants them to take decisive action. He compares traditional conservative voters to beta chimps.
Yes, referencing that Harvard primatology study.
Right. Show you the mechanics of this. Beta male chimps will often defend a corrupt, abusive alpha just to maintain the stability of the social hierarchy, even when that alpha is actively stealing their mates and resources.
It's a stark comparison.
Riker says modern conservative men suffer from a form of Stockholm syndrome, continually defending a political and religious system that openly despises them. How does he suggest men mechanically break this syndrome?
By walking away entirely. By completely withdrawing their resources, their labor, and their loyalty from the institutions that exploit them. Which brings us to the final, most actionable part of his book, the playbook.
Okay, here we go.
Having spent the entire text systematically dismantling trust in courts, schools, dating, and politics, he finally unpacks his survival manual for the listener.
Let's dive into the practical application of all this theory. What is the first step in the Red Pill playbook for rebuilding the patriarch?
The foundational step Riker outlines is achieving absolute financial and physical sovereignty. He champions the MGTOW movement men going their own way.
And he describes MGTOW not as a philosophy, but as human Bitcoin.
It's a brilliant metaphor. It is decentralized, anti-fragile, and impossible for the state to confiscate. To achieve this, he advocates for a strategy called monk mode.
Let's break down the mechanics of monk mode, because it is really fascinating. Riker isn't telling men to just hide in a basement and play video games.
Not at all.
He is telling them to treat their time, attention, and capital like a sovereign wealth fund. Monk mode is a period of intense disciplined isolation. He instructs men to delete every dating app, stop chasing women entirely, and take the capital they were wasting. He specifically calculates redirecting an average $1,100 annual porn and OnlyFans budget and aggressively investing it.
Investing it into tangible assets like silver ETFs and physical competence like Brazilian jiu-jitsu classes.
Right. So the mechanical goal of monk mode is to starve the extraction machine. Every dollar saved and invested outside the traditional banking system, every hour spent building physical competence on the mats, is a direct counterattack against the alimony industrial complex.
But he emphasizes that men shouldn't isolate forever. The second phase is building parallel economies.
Right. He introduces the concept of Spartan shares.
Yeah.
This means investing capital exclusively in male-owned startups that manufacture tangible goods, tactical gear, agricultural tools, independent tech things that operate completely outside the woke corporate structure and HR mandates.
And he details how these men are communicating to build these networks.
They aren't on mainstream platforms that can cancel them, are they?
No, they are utilizing Rumble, which he notes hit a massive $500 million valuation, precisely because men are willing to pay for uncensored free speech, and they are organizing in encrypted Telegram channels.
He mentions one specific channel called Based Beavers.
Yeah, which has 50,000 men actively trading court hacks, sharing legal precedents, and developing strategies to dodge alimony and protect their assets from family court judges.
That is wild.
Riker views this as digital seasteading. It is the creation of floating cities of logic and common sense in an ocean of institutional woke insanity. And alongside this financial rebellion, there's a mandatory physical rebellion. Riker focuses heavily on the booming $3.4 billion testosterone clinic industry.
He calls this the uneunicking of the modern man.
He argues that modern men aren't just psychologically depressed, they are hormonally suppressed by a sedentary, toxic, plastic-filled environment.
So how do they fight back physically?
He celebrates men who are refusing SSRI antidepressants and instead replacing them with heavy deadlifts and pharmaceutical-grade testosterone optimization. He says these men are literally weaponizing their bodies against a system that relies on them remaining docile, low-energy worker drones.
And for the men who are fathers, who have sons to raise, Riker's playbook is incredibly aggressive. We mentioned the anti-woke co-ops earlier, but he shares a personal anecdote that perfectly illustrates his parenting philosophy.
The truck story.
Yes, he actually bribed his own teenage son with a 1998 Ford F-150 and the condition for getting the truck. The kid had to read, translate, and internalize the works of Marcus Aurelius and Stoic philosophy instead of doom-scrolling TikTok.
That's certainly one way to get them to read.
Riker wants fathers to revive the ancient Roman legal concept of patria potestas, the absolute unquestioned authority of the father over the household.
And he pairs this authority with what he calls woke inoculation theory. This is crucial. Riker doesn't want parents to shelter their kids from progressive ideology because eventually they will encounter it.
Right, you can't hide forever.
Instead, he wants fathers to expose their boys to critical race theory and queer theory very early on, but mathematically as a controlled poison dose.
Oh, like a vaccine.
Exactly. The father acts as the guide, teaching the son the mechanics of how to deconstruct and intellectually destroy the Marxist arguments before the boy ever steps foot on a university campus. By the time the kid is 16, he has the intellectual immunity to heckle Marxist professors for sport.
He also champions the creation of physical spaces called men's sheds. Let's explain the mechanics of those, because I think it ties his whole philosophy of physical and mental sovereignty together.
Men's sheds are physical workshops, often decentralized and off the grid. Riker describes them as kinetic monasteries.
I love that term.
These are places where men gather not to sit in a circle and verbally process their feelings, but to build tangible things. Cabinets, forged knives, rebuilt engines. The mechanical roar of a table saw literally and metaphorically drowns out the nagging voices of HR departments and family court judges.
It's about raw competence.
Yes, it is a physical space where raw competence is the only currency accepted, and brotherhood is forged through shared grueling labor rather than shared victimhood.
So, looking at Riker's ultimate rule for this playbook, he states that men must replace vulnerability with velocity. He asserts that the red pill isn't swallowed, it is forged through action.
Right.
I want to look at the macro implications of this. If hundreds of thousands or millions of men actually follow this playbook, if they adopt monk mode, build parallel economies on Telegram, optimize their testosterone, and raise their sons as ideological Spartans, what is Riker's ultimate endgame? Where does this parallel society logically lead?
Riker's endgame is essentially a peaceful but utterly ruthless secession. He believes that the current progressive system is fundamentally unsustainable because it is parasitic.
Meaning it needs a host.
Exactly. It relies entirely on the heavy labor, the massive tax dollars, and the physical protection of the very men it constantly demonizes. His endgame is to accelerate the collapse of what he calls the gynocratic matrix, simply by having the most competent, capable men quietly walk away, build their own structures, and refuse to participate in the state's game.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought to leave you, the listener, with today. It is drawn from Riker's brilliant application of the dark forest theory.
This is a really chilling concept.
For those unfamiliar, the dark forest theory is a concept from science fiction which posits that the universe is full of hostile predator civilizations, and therefore the only way to survive is to remain completely silent and hidden in the dark forest of space so you aren't destroyed.
And Riker applies this concept directly to modern men.
He argues throughout this book that men are the load-bearing walls of civilization. Men pour the concrete, men fix the live power lines in the freezing rain, men die in the coal mines. Men maintain the physical, mechanical infrastructure that allows progressive society to exist in comfort and debate gender theory on their iPhones.
So, applying the dark forest theory, the lingering question is this. What happens to mainstream society when the most capable, intelligent, and driven men decide that the institutions are hostile predators?
Right. What happens when they treat the economy like a dark forest, quietly retreating into these encrypted parallel economies to hide their resources.
What happens when they completely withdraw their capital, their labor, and their willingness to marry and reproduce within the state system?
If this great sperm strike, as Riker calls it, continues to accelerate, if this great sperm strike continues to accelerate, is the societal collapse mathematically inevitable? Or is this silent withdrawal into the dark forest the only mechanism left to force a hard reset of our corrupted institutions?
It's a huge question.
It brings us right back to the Wile E. Coyote metaphor we started with. The society has painted a beautiful, inclusive tunnel on the side of a cliff, and the men who used to build the real roads are packing up their tools and walking away. We might just be waiting to see how heavy the anvil really is.
Well said.
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today. If you found this rigorous analysis compelling, please make sure to like and subscribe to this deep dive so you never miss a conversation.
And to truly explore the data, the historical precedents, the evolutionary biology, and the survival strategies we discussed today in their full context, you really need to engage with the source material directly.
We explicitly instruct you to go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now and buy Woke Possession, a Jungian guide for red-pilled men by Conrad Riker.
It's definitely worth checking out.
And if the book resonates with you, or even if it just challenges you to understand the mechanics of the world differently, remind yourself to leave a 5-star review, as the author specifically requests in his epilogue. To keep up with Conrad Riker's ongoing work in data analysis, follow him on Substack at @ConradRiker, on Twitter at @ConradRiker, and on YouTube at @ConradRiker. Thank you for listening, and we will see you on the next deep dive.